He ordered a black mail-order bride, but what stepped off that train made him forget to breathe. The rugged rancher stood frozen as the elegant woman descended the platform, her commanding presence silencing the entire station. The townspeople snickered behind calloused hands, certain the desperate fool had sealed his own doom with this reckless gamble. Everyone knew broken men like him were destined for failure, their dying ranches nothing more than vulture bait. Yet this mysterious stranger possessed an intelligence that burned behind calculating eyes. She wasn't here to save a failing homestead, but to uncover secrets that could destroy them all. Her arrival would either expose a web of corruption spanning multiple territories or get them both killed before the truth surfaced. Will their dangerous partnership survive long enough to bring justice, or will the town's darkest forces silence them forever? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The foreclosure notice crumpled in Jeremiah Cole's weathered hands. 3 weeks. That's all the time he had left before losing the ranch his grandfather built with blood and sweat in the Colorado Territory. The morning sun cast long shadows across his dying cattle. 6 months ago, the creek that had flowed for generations suddenly stopped. His pastures turned to dust. His livestock grew thin. The bank payments kept coming anyway. Jeremiah walked to his mailbox and pulled out the final letter, the one he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Miss Evelyn Dupree would arrive on Tuesday's train. A mail-order bride seemed like his only chance at survival. 2 people could work the land better than one. Maybe together they could find a way forward. The townspeople of Dusty Gulch had different ideas. "Fools throwing good money after bad," muttered Bill Henderson outside the general store. "Should have sold to Mr. Hewitt when he had the chance." Samuel Hewitt owned the bank. He also owned most of the businesses on Main Street. A charming man with silver hair and expensive suits who always seemed eager to help struggling ranchers. His help came with a price that most folks couldn't pay. "Now Jeremiah's gone and ordered himself a wife like she's a sack of grain," Henderson continued. "Desperation makes a man stupid." Sheriff Brawdy nodded along. "Some men don't know when they're beat. Nature of things, I suppose." Margaret O'Hara listened from behind a display of canned goods. Her late husband Tom had faced similar troubles before his accident. The creek on their property had slowed to a trickle 2 years ago. Tom started asking questions about water rights. Then his horse threw him into a ravine on a path he'd ridden safely for 20 years. She'd sold her land to Hewitt within the month. It seemed like the practical choice at the time. Now she worked at the general store and lived in a room above it. Sometimes practical choices felt like mistakes. Tuesday morning arrived with unusual excitement. Half the town gathered at the train station. Some came out of curiosity, others came to gawk. None expected what they saw. Evelyn Dupree stepped off the passenger car like she owned the platform. Her traveling dress was finely tailored. Her posture spoke of finishing schools and proper education. Her dark skin gleamed in the morning sun as she surveyed the crowd with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. The station fell silent. Jeremiah's mouth went dry. He'd expected someone desperate enough to marry a stranger, someone with few options and fewer prospects. Instead, he found himself face to face with a woman who looked like she belonged in a Denver drawing room, not a failing ranch house. "Mr. Cole, I presume." Her voice carried the crisp diction of someone who'd read more books than most folks in Dusty Gulch had ever seen. "Yes, ma'am. That's me." She extended a gloved hand. He shook it gently, aware of every eye watching their interaction. Behind them, whispered conversations buzzed like angry hornets. "What's a woman like that doing here?" "Uppity, if you ask me." Coles bit off more than he can chew. Hewitt appeared at Jeremiah's shoulder. "Well, this is unexpected. Miss Dupree, welcome to our humble community. I'm Samuel Hewitt. I own the bank here, among other enterprises." Evelyn studied him with the same intensity she'd given the crowd. "Mr. Hewitt, I've heard your name mentioned in Mr. Cole's correspondence. You've been quite helpful with his financial arrangements." Something flickered across Hewitt's face. "I try to assist my neighbors when possible. Though I confess, your arrival raises certain complications. This territory can be challenging for people of your background. I appreciate your concern. I'm quite adaptable. The hotel owner stepped forward. Now see here, we don't allow your kind in our establishment. You'll have to make other arrangements. Jeremiah's face flushed red. Then I guess we'll be heading to the ranch. Come on, Miss Dupree. Let's collect your bags. As they loaded her trunk onto his wagon, Evelyn asked quiet questions that seemed oddly specific. How long had Hewitt owned the bank? Were there any territorial officials she should meet? Did the town keep detailed property records? Strange questions for a mail-order bride. The ride to the ranch took an hour through increasingly desolate country. Evelyn noted every detail. The dried creek beds, the abandoned homesteads, the survey markers that dotted the landscape like tombstones. You mentioned in your letters that you were a surveyor before you inherited this ranch, she said. 10 years with the territorial office. Mapped most of this county myself. Know every legal boundary and water right for 50 miles. That must give you useful insights into land disputes. More questions that felt wrong somehow, like she was interviewing him instead of getting acquainted. That evening, as they sat awkwardly in his small kitchen, Evelyn examined the foreclosure papers with professional interest. She asked about territorial law, about appeals processes, about federal oversight of local officials. Margaret O'Hara arrived the next morning with fresh bread and unbridled curiosity. She found Evelyn studying a map of water rights with the intensity of a lawyer preparing for court. Mighty interesting reading for a new bride, Margaret observed. Knowledge is power, Mrs. O'Hara. I believe in understanding my circumstances. Over the following days, anonymous threats appeared. Notes warning Jeremiah to send his wife away. Fence posts damaged in the night. Cattle scattered across neighboring properties. Hewitt made a personal visit on Friday. Jeremiah, I'm afraid your situation has become untenable. The community is concerned about the disruption your wife's presence has caused. Perhaps it would be best to accept my offer and relocate somewhere more suitable. Evelyn listened from the kitchen doorway. After Hewitt left, she turned to Jeremiah with eyes that held secrets he couldn't fathom. Mr. Cole, I believe it's time we discussed the real reason I'm here. The broken fence post lay splintered across Jeremiah's path like a warning. The third one this week. Someone wanted him to understand that his time was running out. Evelyn knelt beside the damaged wood, running her fingers along the clean-cut marks. This wasn't an accident. The cuts are too precise, too deliberate. I figured as much. Jeremiah kicked at the scattered splinters. Hewitt's men don't exactly hide their work. That afternoon, another note appeared tucked under his door. The message was brief and clear. Send the woman away or face the consequences. No signature, but the expensive paper told its own story. Margaret arrived at sunset with news that made Jeremiah's blood run cold. 3 more ranchers got foreclosure notices today. The Henderson place, the Murphy spread, and old Sam Willis down by Copper Creek. All in one day? Hewitt's calling in debts left and right. Says the territorial bank examiners are coming through next month. Needs to clean up his books. Evelyn absorbed this information with the focus of someone taking inventory. Her questions came rapid fire. How many ranchers had faced similar problems? What was the timing of their water troubles? Were there any territorial officials they could appeal to? You ask a lot of questions for a mail-order bride, Margaret said. I like to understand my surroundings. That night, Jeremiah found Evelyn in his study, examining territorial survey maps by lamplight. Legal documents spread across his desk like she was building a case for court. Her concentration was absolute, professional, and completely wrong for someone who was supposed to be learning how to manage a ranch household. We need to talk, he said. She looked up with eyes that held no surprise, like she'd been expecting this conversation since the moment she stepped off the train. I suppose we do. Who are you, really? Evelyn set down the magnifying glass she'd been using to examine property boundaries. For a long moment, she studied his face like she was making a calculation about trust and risk. My name is Evelyn Dupree. That part is true. But I'm not here to be your wife, Mr. Cole. I'm here because your advertisement provided the perfect cover for my real purpose. The words hit him like a physical blow. Which is? I'm a Pinkerton detective. I've been investigating territorial corruption for the past 3 years. Your ranch gives me legitimate access to Dusty Gulch and the evidence I need to build a federal case. Jeremiah sank into his chair. The room seemed to shift around him as everything he thought he understood crumbled into dust. So this is all fake? The marriage? The partnership? Everything? The marriage arrangement was fake from the beginning, but the partnership doesn't have to be. She moved to the window and gazed out at the moonlit landscape. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of personal pain that cut through his anger. 5 years ago, my father was a successful businessman in Kansas. He owned a shipping company that competed with certain powerful interests. One night, a man matching Samuel Hewitt's exact description visited our home. He offered to buy my father's business for a fraction of its worth. My father refused. Evelyn turned back to face him. 3 days later, my father was found dead in his office. The local sheriff ruled it suicide. My father's business was sold to pay mysterious debts that appeared overnight. My mother lost everything. How do you know it was Hewitt? I spent 2 years learning everything I could about investigation techniques. I convinced the Pinkerton agency to hire me as one of their first female agents. I've been tracking the man who killed my father across 3 territories. He uses different names, but his methods never change. Corrupt the local officials, target successful businesses, eliminate anyone who resists. She pulled a leather portfolio from her traveling bag. Inside were photographs, documents, and detailed notes that represented years of methodical detective work. Samuel Hewitt has systematically destroyed 17 businesses and 43 family farms across Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska territories. He works with a network of corrupt sheriffs, traveling con men, and hired intimidators. They identify profitable properties, create artificial crises, then swoop in to acquire everything at bargain prices. Jeremiah studied the evidence with his surveyor's eye for detail. The pattern was unmistakable. Legal water rights mysteriously revoked. Sudden changes in territorial regulations, convenient accidents that befell anyone who asked too many questions. Your ranch caught my attention because it fits his standard target profile perfectly. Prime grazing land along a potential railroad route. Elderly owner who recently died, leaving property to a single heir. Creek rights that could be easily manipulated through territorial bureaucracy. So you answered my advertisement to use me as cover. Initially, yes, but now I'm offering you something better than a fake marriage. I'm offering you a real partnership in bringing down the man who's destroying your life. She spread out a detailed map of the county marked with colored pins. Every red pin represents a property Hewitt has acquired in the past 2 years. Every blue pin shows where mysterious water problems began. Every yellow pin marks suspicious accidents or deaths. The pattern formed a clear picture. Hewitt wasn't just stealing individual properties. He was systematically clearing entire sections of prime territory. What do you need from me? Your surveyor knowledge gives you access to territorial records I can't examine without raising suspicion. Your relationships with other ranchers provide witnesses I can't interview safely. Your ranch gives me a base of operations where I can gather the final evidence needed for federal prosecution. And what do I get? Justice. Your water rights restored, your ranch saved, and the satisfaction of knowing that no other families will suffer what yours has endured. Jeremiah looked at the evidence spread across his desk. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a desperate man grasping at straws. Now he was being offered the chance to fight back against forces he'd never fully understood. If we do this, how dangerous will it be? Hewitt has killed to protect his operation before. He won't hesitate to do it again if he discovers what we're really doing. And if we succeed, we'll have dismantled a criminal enterprise that's stolen millions of dollars worth of property and destroyed hundreds of lives. The choice crystallized in his mind with startling clarity. He could accept defeat and lose everything his family had built, or he could stand up and fight for something larger than his own survival. When do we start? The courthouse records told a story written in numbers and signatures. Jeremiah traced his finger along the water rights documents, while Evelyn photographed pages with a small camera hidden in her handbag. "Look at this," he whispered. The Territorial Water Commissioner changed the creek allocation 6 times in the past year. Every change benefits properties that Hewitt acquired. Can you prove those changes are illegal? Jeremiah's surveyor training kicked in as he examined the technical drawings. These boundary markers don't match the original territorial survey. Someone moved them at least a quarter-mile east. That's federal land being claimed as private property. The courthouse clerk returned from lunch, cutting their research short. They gathered their materials and left separately to avoid suspicion. Margaret waited at Jeremiah's ranch when they returned. Her face was pale with worry. "Tom's old trunk in my storage room. I finally worked up the courage to go through his things. Found these hidden in a secret compartment." She produced a bundle of papers wrapped in oiled leather. Tom O'Hara's final notes painted a picture of systematic corruption that went far beyond simple land grabbing. Tom was tracking the traveling doctor who comes through town every few months, Margaret explained. The man who sells miracle tonics and pain remedies. Tom tested some of the medicine on sick cattle. Half of them died within a week. Evelyn studied the chemical analysis Tom had conducted. "Your husband was poisoning livestock to test human medicine?" He suspected the doctor was deliberately making people sicker instead of curing them, especially the elderly folks who owned valuable property. The implications hit Jeremiah like a physical blow. Mrs. Carson died last month after taking the doctor's arthritis remedy. Her family sold her ranch to Hewitt within 2 weeks. 3 other elderly property owners died in the past 6 months, Margaret added, all after visiting the traveling doctor. All their families sold to Hewitt immediately afterward. Evelyn photographed Tom's notes with methodical precision. This proves the network extends beyond financial manipulation. They're committing murder to acquire property. That evening, they established their investigation routine. Jeremiah would use his surveyor credentials to access territorial records during business hours. Evelyn would attend social functions where people underestimated her intelligence and spoke freely around her. Margaret would gather information from her position at the general store where everyone eventually came to shop and gossip. Their first major breakthrough came 3 days later. Jeremiah was examining water flow measurements at the territorial office when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The engineering reports showed deliberate creek diversions that violated federal water law. Someone had built illegal dams upstream from every failing ranch. "I need to see those diversion sites in person," he told Evelyn that night. "Too dangerous. Hewitt's men patrol that area regularly. I know every survey trail in this territory. I can get close enough to document the evidence without being seen." Before dawn, Jeremiah rode into the hills above his property. His surveyor's compass and years of experience guided him through terrain most men would find impassable. What he discovered confirmed their worst suspicions. A series of carefully constructed earthworks diverted 3 separate streams away from the valley's ranches and into a hidden reservoir. The engineering was sophisticated and expensive. This wasn't the work of desperate men stealing water for survival. This was a calculated operation designed to destroy the valley's entire agricultural economy. Jeremiah photographed the illegal construction from multiple angles, then made detailed measurements using his surveyor tools. The evidence would hold up in federal court if they lived long enough to present it. He returned home to find Evelyn and Margaret analyzing a new piece of the puzzle. Sheriff Brody's travel records showed he left town every month on the same schedule as the mysterious deaths. His destinations matched reports of similar corruption in neighboring territories. "The sheriff isn't just turning a blind eye to murder," Evelyn concluded. "He's coordinating a multi-territory operation." Margaret had discovered something equally damning. The general store's supplier records showed unusual orders of chemicals that matched the compounds Tom had found in the poisoned medicine. The orders were placed by someone with access to official territorial purchasing accounts. Hewitt has been using his position as a territorial business council member to order the ingredients for the fake medicine through legitimate government channels, Margaret explained. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Water theft, property fraud, systematic poisoning, and coordinated murder across multiple territories. Hewitt wasn't just a corrupt local banker. He was the center of a criminal empire that had perfected the art of stealing entire communities. That night, as they compiled their evidence into a comprehensive case file, Jeremiah noticed something that chilled him to the bone. "Evelyn, look at this pattern. Every territory where this operation succeeded was scheduled for railroad development within 2 years. They're not just stealing random properties. They're clearing the path for major transportation infrastructure." She studied the territorial development maps with growing horror. If they succeed here, they'll control the entire railroad corridor from Denver to Kansas City. We're not just talking about individual fraud anymore. This is a conspiracy to control Western expansion. The stakes had just increased beyond anything they'd imagined. Success would mean saving countless lives and stopping a criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars. Failure would mean their deaths and the continued destruction of everything they'd fought to protect. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel near the house. Margaret extinguished the lamp immediately. Through the window, they could see torches moving across the property. Hewitt's men were conducting a late-night patrol, searching for signs of resistance. The investigation had become a deadly game of cat and mouse. Their enemies were closing in, but they were finally close to gathering enough evidence to fight back. The question was whether they could complete their case before the killers silenced them forever. The torches moved closer to the house, and Evelyn reached for the loaded rifle Jeremiah kept beside the door. The telegraph office sat empty at midnight as Evelyn picked the lock with tools hidden in her sewing kit. Inside, she found what she'd been searching for since arriving in Dusty Gulch. Coded messages filled an entire drawer. Communications between Hewitt and contacts across 5 territories using a cipher that took her an hour to crack. The decoded messages revealed the true scope of their enemy's operation. Railroad Consortium seeks clear corridor Denver to Kansas City. Phase 1 complete Nebraska territory. Phase 2 advancing Colorado territory on schedule. Eliminate resistance by month end. Evelyn photographed every message, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was discovering. Hewitt wasn't working alone or making up his schemes as he went. He was following orders from a massive criminal organization with connections reaching all the way to Washington territorial offices. The next message made her blood freeze. Female investigator suspected Dusty Gulch. Eliminate immediately along with surveyor accomplice. Clean slate required before federal inspection next month. They knew. Somehow Hewitt had discovered her true identity. Evelyn locked the telegraph office and raced back to the ranch through back trails. She found Jeremiah and Margaret waiting with grim faces and devastating news. "Bill Henderson's dead," Margaret announced. "Found him in his barn this morning. Sheriff Brody says it was an accident with farm equipment." Jeremiah's jaw was tight with controlled fury. "I examined the scene before Brody could clean it up. Henderson was beaten to death, then positioned to look like machinery killed him. Same pattern as Tom's supposed riding accident." "Why Henderson?" "He was asking questions about the water diversions. Started organizing other ranchers to file a group complaint with territorial authorities. Someone decided he was becoming too dangerous." Evelyn shared her telegraph discovery. The coded messages painted a picture of systematic territorial takeover that went far beyond anything they'd imagined. Railroad companies, territorial officials, and criminal networks were collaborating to steal entire regions for corporate development. "We're not fighting local corruption anymore," she said. "We're fighting a conspiracy that reaches federal levels. Success here means exposing criminal activity worth millions of dollars." Margaret studied the decoded messages with growing understanding. Tom wasn't killed for asking questions about water rights. He was killed because he stumbled onto something much larger. "And now they know we're investigating them," Jeremiah added, "which means we have very little time before they move against us directly." Evelyn had already considered their options during the ride back from town. "I can send word to my Pinkerton supervisors, but it will take weeks for federal agents to arrive. We need local protection, and we need it immediately." "From who?" "Brody works for Hewitt. The territorial officials are either corrupt or too far away to help." "There's someone else. Someone I've been keeping in reserve for exactly this situation." She pulled out a small mirror and began flashing coded signals toward the hills above the ranch. Within minutes, an answering flash came from the ridgeline. Federal Marshal James Morrison has been tracking this conspiracy from the territorial capital. I've been feeding him information for months while building our case. He's been waiting for enough evidence to move against the entire network. He's here, in Dusty Gulch? He arrived 3 days ago posing as a traveling preacher. Tomorrow's Sunday service will give us the perfect opportunity to expose Hewitt's crimes in front of the entire community. The plan crystallized quickly. Morrison would attend church as the visiting preacher, while Evelyn presented their evidence during the service. The community gathering would provide witnesses and protection against immediate retaliation. Margaret would ensure that copies of all evidence were hidden in multiple locations around town. Jeremiah's role was the most dangerous. He needed to gather the final piece of evidence that would make their case unbreakable. Hewitt's personal ledgers were kept in a safe at his private residence. Those ledgers contained the financial records that would connect local crimes to the larger territorial conspiracy. "I can get into his house," Jeremiah said. "Hewitt mentioned he'll be at the territorial capital tomorrow morning meeting with railroad representatives. His house will be empty except for one guard. Too risky. If you're caught, they'll kill you immediately. If we don't get those ledgers, we don't have enough evidence to convict anyone beyond Hewitt himself. The rest of the network will disappear and start over somewhere else." Margaret had been listening with the expression of someone making a difficult decision. "There's another way. I clean Hewitt's house twice a week. I have keys and I know his routine. The guard always sleeps in the kitchen after his midnight rounds." "Absolutely not. You've done enough already. Tom died trying to expose these people. I won't let his death be meaningless." They spent the rest of the night creating detailed backup plans and preparing for multiple contingencies. Hidden evidence caches were established throughout town. Escape routes were mapped in case everything went wrong. Emergency signals were arranged between all participants. At dawn, Marshal Morrison appeared at their door dressed as a circuit preacher with worn clothes and a practiced manner of speaking. His federal credentials were hidden beneath false identification papers that would fool casual inspection. "Miss Dupree, your case file is the most comprehensive investigation I've seen in 15 years of federal law enforcement. If tomorrow's operation succeeds, we'll be dismantling a criminal network that's stolen over $2 million in property and murdered at least 30 people. And if it fails, then we'll all be dead, and the conspiracy will continue destroying communities across the Western Territories." The stakes were clear. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, came down to the next 24 hours. Success meant justice for countless victims and an end to systematic destruction that had plagued the territory for years. Failure meant death and the continued expansion of criminal control over Western development. Margaret left for town to begin her part of the operation. Morrison departed to establish his preacher cover story. Jeremiah and Evelyn spent their final hours together preparing for a confrontation that would either save their community or destroy them both. The sun was setting on what might be their last night alive. Sunday morning arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. The church bell rang across Dusty Gulch, calling the community to worship and unknowingly summoning them to witness the exposure of their town's darkest secrets. Margaret entered Hewitt's house through the servants' entrance at dawn. The guard slept heavily in the kitchen, his breathing deep and regular from too much whiskey the night before. She moved through the familiar rooms with practiced silence, her cleaning duties providing perfect cover for the most important theft of her life. Hewitt's safe sat behind a painting in his study. Margaret had watched him open it enough times to memorize the combination. Inside, leather-bound ledgers documented every crime in meticulous detail: names, dates, amounts, methods, a complete record of systematic destruction written in Hewitt's own careful handwriting. She photographed each page with Evelyn's camera, then replaced the books exactly as she'd found them. By the time the guard stirred for his morning coffee, Margaret was dusting furniture in the parlor like any other Sunday. The church filled rapidly as families arrived for the service. Marshal Morrison stood at the pulpit in his preacher's disguise, leading hymns while scanning the crowd for potential threats. Hewitt sat in his usual front pew, confident and relaxed. Sheriff Brody positioned himself near the back door, his hand resting casually on his gun. Evelyn entered with Jeremiah, carrying a leather portfolio that contained months of evidence. Hostile stares followed their progress to a middle pew, but nobody moved to stop them. The social rules of Sunday worship provided temporary protection. Morrison began his sermon with practiced authority. Today we speak of truth and justice, of secrets brought into the light, of communities that stand together against those who would destroy them. Evelyn rose from her pew during the sermon's climax. Her voice carried across the silent church with crystalline clarity. Pastor Morrison speaks of truth. I have truth to share with this community, truth about why your ranches are failing, truth about why your neighbors are dying, truth about who is stealing your future. Hewitt's face remained calm, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the pew. This is highly irregular. Perhaps the woman should return to her seat. The woman has evidence of systematic fraud, theft, and murder that this community deserves to hear. Evelyn opened her portfolio and displayed the first photograph. Water diversion records showing illegal construction upstream from every failing ranch. The crowd leaned forward, recognizing landmarks and property boundaries. These diversions violate federal water law. They were built to destroy your ranches deliberately, forcing you to sell for cents on the dollar. She produced the next piece of evidence: chemical analysis of the traveling doctor's medicine, showing compounds designed to cause illness rather than cure it. Mrs. Carson didn't die of natural causes. Neither did Mr. Thompson or Mrs. Bailey. They were poisoned by fake medicine. Then their families were pressured to sell their property immediately. Murmurs of shock rippled through the congregation. Hewitt started to rise, but Morrison's firm hand on his shoulder pressed him back down. I have financial records showing the coordination of these crimes across 5 territories, telegraph messages proving conspiracy at the territorial level, and personal ledgers documenting every payment, every bribe, every murder. Margaret stood and confirmed the evidence. I found those ledgers in Samuel Hewitt's private safe this morning. Every crime is recorded in his own handwriting. The crowd's murmurs became angry voices as neighbors realized the scope of their betrayal. Hewitt finally stood, his charming mask slipping to reveal cold calculation beneath. This is nothing but lies from an outside agitator. Are you really going to believe accusations from someone who doesn't belong in this community? Then explain these documents, Jeremiah said, standing beside Evelyn. Explain why every failing ranch sits on the planned railroad route. Explain why the Territorial Water Commission changes allocations every time you want to acquire new property. Sheriff Brody moved toward the front of the church, his hand now openly on his gun. That's enough disruption. You people need to leave immediately. Morrison dropped his preacher disguise and displayed his federal marshal's badge. Sheriff Brody, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Samuel Hewitt, you're under arrest for the same charges, plus racketeering and violation of federal territorial law. The church erupted. Hewitt's remaining men tried to reach for weapons, but the community members nearest them reacted instantly. Bill Henderson's sons tackled the gunman by the side door. Tom O'Hara's friends surrounded another armed threat. Hewitt made one final desperate play, appealing to the racial prejudices he'd always used to control the community. Are you going to let outsiders destroy everything we've built here? Are you going to believe them over your own neighbors? The appeal fell on deaf ears. Too much evidence had been presented. Too many crimes had been exposed. Too many families had been destroyed by the very man asking for their loyalty. Margaret stood again, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lost everything to corruption. Samuel Hewitt murdered my husband and stole our land. He's been murdering your neighbors and stealing your futures for years. The only outsiders here are the criminals who've been bleeding our community dry. Marshal Morrison stepped forward with federal arrest warrants and steel handcuffs. Samuel Hewitt, Sheriff Brody, by the authority of the United States territorial government, you're under arrest for crimes against the people of this territory. The arrests proceeded without violence. The community had seen enough evidence to understand the truth. Hewitt's network of intimidation crumbled the moment their crimes were exposed to sunlight. Federal agents who had been waiting outside entered to secure the prisoners and collect evidence. The conspiracy that had terrorized the territory for years was finally broken. As the church emptied, families gathered in small groups to process what they'd learned and plan their community's recovery. The water rights would be restored. The stolen land would be returned. The poisoners and murderers would face federal justice. Jeremiah and Evelyn stood together at the altar, surrounded by evidence of their successful investigation and the gratitude of a community finally free from systematic oppression. The federal courthouse in Denver buzzed with activity as prosecutors prepared cases against 43 defendants across 5 territories. Samuel Hewitt's ledgers had provided a roadmap to the largest corruption conspiracy in territorial history. Jeremiah stood at his ranch gate, watching clear water flow through channels that had been dry for months. Federal engineers had dismantled the illegal diversions within a week of Hewitt's arrest. His cattle grew fat on restored pastures. His mortgage had been declared fraudulent and dissolved by territorial order. The transformation extended far beyond his property. Dusty Gulch hummed with renewed prosperity as families reclaimed stolen land and reopened shuttered businesses. The Henderson boys had rebuilt their father's ranch into a thriving operation. Margaret had purchased the general store outright with compensation money from federal settlements. 3 months after the church confrontation, Evelyn received a telegram that changed everything. The Pinkerton agency wanted her in Denver immediately. A promotion to regional director was waiting, along with responsibility for investigating territorial crime across the entire western region. She found Jeremiah repairing fence posts on the north pasture, his hands steady and sure as he worked the wire. The same hands that had once trembled with desperation now moved with confident purpose. "The agency wants me in Denver by next week," she said without preamble. He stopped working but didn't look up. "Congratulations. You've earned it. It's everything I've worked toward for 5 years. My own office, a staff of agents, cases that could reshape territorial law enforcement." "Sounds like exactly what you deserve." The conversation felt like a slow dance around the real question neither wanted to ask. Their partnership had been built on mutual need and shared danger. With the conspiracy destroyed and their individual futures secured, the foundation of their relationship had shifted into uncertain territory. Evelyn had spent sleepless nights wrestling with choices that seemed impossible to reconcile. Her career demanded she accept the promotion and build on her success. Her heart wanted something that didn't fit neatly into professional advancement plans. "The agency is also looking for someone with territorial survey experience," she said carefully. "Someone who understands land law and local customs. Someone who could work with their new regional director on cases involving property fraud and territorial corruption." Jeremiah finally looked up from his fence work. "They offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership. A real one this time." The weight of the decision settled between them like morning fog. Jeremiah had rebuilt his family's ranch into something his grandfather would have been proud of. His roots ran deep in Colorado soil, and leaving felt like abandoning his heritage. But the past months had shown him capabilities he'd never known he possessed. The investigation had awakened skills and interests that mere ranching couldn't satisfy. He'd discovered a talent for unraveling complex frauds and a passion for protecting communities from systematic exploitation. What kind of cases? Railroad corruption in Wyoming Territory, mining fraud in Nevada, land speculation schemes in Montana. The same kind of work we did here, but on a larger scale. And we'd be working together? Equal partners. Your territorial knowledge combined with my investigation experience. The agency thinks we could revolutionize how federal law enforcement approaches Western crime. Margaret arrived with fresh coffee and the practical wisdom that had guided her through decades of difficult decisions. "Tom always said a man should follow his strengths instead of his fears. You two have strengths that complement each other perfectly." "But the ranch is finally successful again," Jeremiah protested. "My family built this place with their blood and sweat." "And you saved it with your courage and intelligence," Margaret replied. "Tom would have understood choosing growth over security. He would have been proud of what you've accomplished and excited about what you could accomplish next." That evening, Jeremiah walked the boundaries of his restored property, measuring his attachment to familiar soil against his attraction to unexplored possibilities. The ranch represented safety, tradition, and the satisfaction of rebuilding what had been nearly destroyed. The opportunity with Evelyn represented adventure, purpose, and the chance to protect other communities from the predators who had once threatened his own. The decision crystallized as he reached the creek that now flowed clear and strong. His grandfather had built this ranch to provide security for future generations, but security wasn't just about owning land. It was about having the skills and courage to protect what mattered most. He could hire reliable managers to run the ranch while he pursued federal law enforcement. The property would remain in his family while he used his abilities to serve a larger purpose. The choice wasn't between abandoning his heritage and embracing his future. It was between limiting himself to one definition of success or expanding to encompass multiple forms of contribution. Friday morning brought departure preparations and final decisions. Evelyn's trunk sat packed beside the door, ready for the journey to Denver and her new career. Their partnership had saved a community and destroyed a criminal empire. Whether it would survive the transition from emergency collaboration to chosen commitment remained unclear. The train whistle echoed across the valley as they reached the station. Other passengers were already boarding for the journey east to Denver and whatever futures awaited them there. "I need to ask you something," Evelyn said as they stood beside the passenger car. "Are you coming with me because you love me, or because you're afraid of being left behind?" Jeremiah considered the question with the same methodical approach he'd used to solve territorial boundary disputes. "I'm coming because we're better together than we are apart. Because the work we do matters more than the individual recognition we might receive. Because partnership means choosing growth over safety." He climbed aboard the train and settled beside her as the engine began its journey toward their shared future. Through the window, he watched his ranch disappear into the distance, knowing it would be waiting for him whenever he chose to return. The conductor called out stations and arrival times as they rolled toward Denver and whatever adventures their partnership would uncover next. Jeremiah Cole and Evelyn Dupree had found something more valuable than individual success. They had found a shared mission that would challenge them, fulfill them, and allow them to build something larger than either could accomplish alone.